What, according to you, is trauma? What do you think, in your experience or your mind or in working with people that you have, is trauma?
What I have realized, and this has been also validated by many experts, is that trauma is not defined by the event per se, but
Mm.
it's defined by our interpretation, our what we because the same event can happen to me and to you, and we have different coping skills. As you were talking about the coping skills, we have different resilience in our bodies, in our
Mhm.
system. So the same thing that can be traumatic for me might be just a bad experience for you, or not even. It's our interpretation that defines trauma, and this is why sometimes someone is even invalidating himself or herself because they think, okay, maybe this was not so bad. But if you felt it was traumatic for you, then you have to validate your feelings, no matter what other people say. And there's also the whole biology behind trauma, how you actually know that
Right.
you are holding trauma in your body, right?
Right. That's actually really beautiful, because for those of you who don't know, there's a really famous like psychologist and therapist, and he is incredibly like famous now across the world. Gives conversations, especially on trauma. He specializes in trauma, and he himself had said, trauma is not what happens to you; it's how you interpret what happens to you.
Right.
So in essence, it's almost like the story that our mind holds on to when something happens to us. Something I like to tell people is, shame actually doesn't happen when, for example, a sexual trauma or a physical trauma actually happens. It happens after that particular trauma, when the child tries to go back to their family and feels like, am I in a safe enough space not to be judged, for me to be able to tell them my story, for me to be able to speak the truth, for me to be able to share, and to have them really listen to me and to really make me feel comfortable, non-judged, accepted for what happened, and still make me feel loved. And the problem is, that is what's missing in our life. Not just like the event in itself. The event happens by chance. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be controlled. It cannot be prevented. But what can actually be worked on is what tends to happen after a lot of the events. Because someone brought up like a really heavy event of like sexual trauma, and the event may not be able to be controlled, but the environment and the safety afterwards can really be, that is what can be regulated, to make someone feel loved, to make someone feel safe, so that they don't feel the weight, or they don't interpret it as being like, oh, now because this has happened to me, I'm fucked up, or I'm messed up, or I'm ashamed. Right? Wouldn't you agree?
I agree completely. Actually, what you're saying reminds me to something I heard about Peter when Peter Levine was talking about trauma. What
Uh-huh.
what he started to realize, he's by the way another expert on trauma, and he started to study trauma in animals, and he said,
Mm.
why do animals find so easy to get rid of trauma? Most animals in the wild, and
Right.
we humans find it so hard. And it's about a lot about what you say, our conditioning, the shame, the guilt, our
Mm. Yeah.
intellect is betraying us because we feel we cannot let it out. What animals
Right.
do right after a traumatic event, and you can just search on YouTube like animals and trauma, and you will see animals
Right.
shaking wildly. And they always do it in community right after they
Yeah.
find a partner, right? And
Right.
it's incredible. So what we should do is actually to shake, scream, cry, and talk. And
Right.
what happens instead is that we are like, a traumatic event happens, for example, a sexually traumatic event, and we feel so much guilt and shame, and we feel we cannot talk about it. Actually, in one of my
Right.
retreats, I had like 20 women.
Mhm.
This was like a holistic retreat about some other topic. But
Right.
coincidentally, I don't think feel it's coincidentally, 15 women out of 20 almost had like um, sexual trauma.
Wow.
It was
Yeah.
incredible. But the most interesting thing is that they had never talked about to anyone. So the first
Right.
time they ever said it was on the retreat. Some of them were over 50 years old. So
Wow. So
this
imagine for how many years they were keeping it inside.
Yes,
right?
that's a lot to hold on to.
Yeah. And I find that the hardest thing is actually not just that we have to talk about it, but I feel like as a child or as a person, we have tried to express it in some way, but the environment has made it so unsafe for us to try and release it. Whether it's to talk about it, whether it's to cry about it, whether it's to feel through it, whether it's to go to daddy or mommy and just hold on to them and just like let it out. The environment itself, because our environment has its own wounds, it has its own judgments, it has its own shadows and stories. If someone comes to me with that wound, I don't know how to hold space for them. So unconsciously I reject them when they're holding such a sensitive piece of information that they're trying to let go of, right? And it can be so difficult because these are young children and you think, okay, they're a child, what does this matter? But one day this child becomes an adult, and then this child is holding on to so much, and this child doesn't know how to trust another partner, this child doesn't know how to create love, this child fears like connection. And so trauma can be so like, it can be after many years we think we've forgotten it, but it lives in our body, right?
Completely. And it's as you said, it's not that we have this huge disadvantage. It's like we are actually born believing that we deserve love. Like
Right.
us are born like this, unless we have like a traumatic experience inside the womb. But apart from that, most of us, like babies, don't think at 3 a.m. in the morning, oh, I'm not gonna cry for food because I'm gonna
Right.
wake up my mom. They're like,
Mhm.
I deserve love, I deserve attention, and I'm
Right.
cry. And when a baby starts to learn how to walk, they fall 100 times, and they are not like, you know what, I'm falling for the time number 30, so maybe this is not
Right.
for me. They have so much more, self-trust and
Right.
capacity to express themselves. Is
Right.
during this phase of being able to express that adults normally shut them down, like, don't
Mhm.
talk like that, don't say that, don't
Right.
express this. And some of my students, because I have a lot of women within my students and clients, they have been able to say, this happened to me, I was raped, and their family, they don't, they are like, okay, don't tell to anyone, okay, this didn't
Yeah.
happen, or they don't believe. So
Right.
that's actually way more traumatic than the event per se.
Exactly.
Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.